All right, welcome to First Nephi chapter 16. So if you remember, Nephi's had these debates and discussions going on with his brothers about the meaning of his father's dream and vision. And Nephi is trying to encourage them to follow God, to seek the Spirit, to do things to have the Spirit guide them and help them in their life. And they're not really paying attention to it, unfortunately. So that conversation's wrapping up, and now we're gonna start to see some more forward movement in the history of what's going on here. So verse 1, and now it came to pass that after I, Nephi, had made an end of speaking to my brethren, behold, they said unto me, Thou hast declared unto us hard things more than we are able to bear. So they're like, man, this is some hard stuff. Like, I've got to make a lot of changes to my life to adopt to this. It's causing challenges and issues. And verse 2, Nephi says, And it came to pass, I said unto them that I knew that I had spoken hard things against the wicked, according to the truth. And the righteous have I justified, and testified that they should be lifted up at the last day. Wherefore the guilty taketh the truth to be hard, for it cutteth them to the very center. Now there's an interesting principle that Nephi is pointing out here, the idea of only the guilty get offended. Because if you're not guilty, there's nothing to be offended by. So it's an interesting idea that when we're going down one path and it gets pointed out to us that we should be on this path, but there's a lot of change and transition to get to here, that's when we go, oh, this is not an easy thing to think about. Oh my gosh, I got to make a lot of changes to get over here to really course correct. And so this is why it's good to keep adjusting as you go in life. Keep focusing on it, because as you find yourself going this way, you can easily correct quickly. But when you finally get further over this way and you've got to make a huge correction, that's when change becomes really difficult. So that's what he's talking about here. He wants his brothers to change, because obviously they're in a wicked state. They still have thought patterns that are more worldly and not spiritual. And so how Nephi is thinking is very different than how his brothers are thinking. He's viewing the world in a very different way because he's coming from a more spiritual standpoint. And so he's trying to encourage them to change. And they're admitting, where you're at and where we're at, Nephi, is so far apart. I don't know if we can make up the difference. This is a challenge, a big challenge. I do have a quote here. Let's see. This is, this is actually getting into these ideas of dealing with these challenges. So it says, life and death are easily understood in the light of the Holy Ghost, but like everything else, they are hard to be understood in its absence. That was Brigham Young, Journal of Discourses, talked about that. This idea of things being hard to understand comes down to realizing that in order for us to understand something, we must have a framework of beliefs and concepts that help us to comprehend the information that is given to us. If we do not have a way to conceptualize the information, we will have a hard time understanding it. Sometimes this happens because we simply do not have that framework for understanding it. So this is that idea of Laman and Lemuel over here. They're thinking in this worldly philosophy pattern. Nephi's over here thinking in this more spiritual minded pattern. And so to the worldly minded, spiritual stuff doesn't make a lot of sense. To the spiritually minded, worldly stuff doesn't make a lot of sense. So this is the contrast that Nephi and his brothers are giving us, and that's what they're literally talking about in this position here. Is we're looking at things from different perspectives. So how do we make that transition? How do we change? And this is where like a faith crisis can come in, because sometimes a faith crisis says, I was here, but now I've moved away from that position and I'm looking back at it. I have the perspective to look at my previous beliefs and realize maybe I wasn't completely true. Maybe part of it was true, but part of it wasn't. And sometimes people look at this and they go way over here and go, okay, I'm going to look at the gospel from a worldly standpoint, and it makes no sense at all. So why did I ever join this church? I'm out. Where sometimes a faith crisis can be just a small perspective shift. It doesn't have to be a huge one. So not every faith crisis is equal in size and scope and capacity to do things. But there are some things we can do to help us. One is study the scriptures. That's what you're doing right now. Congratulations. as we study the scriptures, that can help us to think in a spiritual minded way and look back and go, oh, yeah, I don't know what I was thinking, why that was a good idea. So studying the scriptures can help us. Hanging out with people who have that framework. So if we want to be more spiritually minded, then hanging out with people who are spiritually minded will start to learn how they think and will, by subconscious means, start to adopt a similar mentality and start to think in different ways. Another thing that you can do is have the Spirit with you. The Spirit can guide you to truth and help you to think through things and ideas. So if you find yourself looking at where you're at in life and where the scriptures say you should be as big changes, pray, have conversations with God, have His Spirit with you, read the scriptures and understand them, hang out with people who are spiritual, and that'll make a big impact on your life and how you start to see things. So just realize that, okay? That we can think from a framework that makes the other side look like it makes no sense. So, and this is a challenge because if you are a spiritually minded person and you're talking to somebody who's more worldly minded, it doesn't matter how much you try to tell them how good it is over here, they won't see it. Not because they refuse to see it, but the framework of how they think, it doesn't allow for the possibility of that. And so that's where you have to start to shift that. So we have to realize that just because we think it is one way doesn't mean it is actually that way. There's a tremendous diversity in abilities to think and do things, so that we have to be acknowledging. And this happens sometimes when people have that faith crisis, is they're thinking this way. And suddenly they think a little bit different, and they think it's so wildly different that they just go, oh, well, I'm going to completely accept this and reject this altogether. Because this feels so new, it feels so different that I'm going to accept this and completely reject what I've known before. When all they're doing is just changing a frame of reference. It doesn't, just changing this frame of reference doesn't negate the truth of anything you already know. You're just looking at the world from a different perspective. It's like taking off, like if you have rose-colored glasses and you take them off and you put on orange-colored glasses instead of red, you're going to see different colors and different things. Just because you're seeing a different perspective does not negate the truth of what you knew before. This is something that people often forget when you get into this idea of a faith crisis, is they think, oh, if one thing is, I learned something that challenged what I believed in my religion. And that's good. That's actually a good thing to challenge what you believe in your religion, because it helps you to reevaluate and refine what you believe in your religion. But they'll oftentimes say, because I see it differently, I'm going to double down on, do a whole 100% go this direction instead and reject what I used to have. And they throw all the baby with the bathwater out. They take all the truth they used to have, they throw it all out. And then they stick with this perspective. And so they just changed perspectives is all they did. They're not looking for more truth. They're just seeing it from a different perspective. But then they reject the previous truth. So they're not better off. This is the problem we have. The goal of a faith crisis actually should be to help us to find the truth, not change perspectives. That is a different type of search. If you find something different about your religion, you have to realize, is that really what that religion believed, or is that my perception of what that religion believed? Because sometimes that's where the discrepancy comes in. So if your goal is to look for the objective truth, you're not so concerned about it's okay if I stay in my religion or not. Just because I found something wrong doesn't mean I have to suddenly leave my religion. It just means I need to understand things better. And there's a process that can take time to go through that. But that's this discrepancy that we see in this example between Nephi and his brothers. Nephi is very spiritually minded. His brothers are very worldly minded. And that's part of the problem that they have, is they don't see eye to eye, and they talk past each other sometimes. So we have to be willing to learn and adjust what we do to find more truth. And that means changing a little bit of what we believe, but not getting rid of it all at the same time. But Nephi's point here is, of course, that if you are not following God, so you're guilty of sin, which is the definition of not following God, then it can get hard to come back. If your pride gets in the way, if you feel like, oh, I'm just so far gone, I can't make it, depression gets in the way or other things, it can be hard to make that change because you've grown so far apart. It is 100% possible to make that change. And that's through God. He'll help you to make that change. But it's way easier to make smaller adjustments. That's why repenting often is good. It's easier to make small adjustments than these huge adjustments. All right, let's continue on now. Verse 3. And now, my brethren, if ye were righteous and were willing to hearken to the truth and give heed unto it, that ye might walk uprightly before God, then you would not murmur because of the truth, and say, thou speakest hard things against us. So again, this open to learning. Okay, you've got to be willing to be open to learning. You've got to be willing to be open to understanding new things and trying new things. If you stick with what I believe is what I believe and I'm not going to change it, most of what you believe is false. Honestly, even if you believe you are following a religion, most of what you believe is actually false. It's your perception of the religion. It's not the real truth of the religion. There's more for you to learn, but you've got to be open to that doubt in yourself. Okay, to learn new things, you have to be open to doubt what you currently believe. Not everything you currently believe. But you have to realize, oh, I just learned something new. I need to be open to understanding that and changing how I believe around that principle. Not everything, but that principle, so that I can improve my learning. And that's kind of what Nephi is getting at here is, if you guys were righteous, if you were making those choices, those little small adjustments of repentance and improving and following this, reading the scriptures and following the prophet, this wouldn't be as hard of an issue. Because you haven't done those little small things, it's a big change. So verse 4, and it came to pass that I, Nephi, did exhort my brethren with all diligence to keep the commandments of the Lord. And it came to pass that they did humble themselves before the Lord, insomuch that I had joy and great hopes of them, that they would walk in the paths of righteousness. So they're like, yeah, you're right, I need to do more, I need to be better, okay, I'll work on that. So they're understanding that I need to change. So they're moving that way. Verse 6, now all these were said and done as my father dwelt in a tent in the valley which he called Lemuel. And if you remember, this is one of the first major camps that they stopped at to make a permanent camp. So Lemuel is in this valley, there's a river, and there was the mountains and the ocean, Red Sea over there type idea. And so this is where they stayed. Now Lehi and Sariah, they've been here for a while. Like they've been here for a good month or two. Because remember, they trekked out here, then they sent their sons back for the plates, the brass plates. That took about 10 days to get back probably. Then they had a day or two or three to figure out what to do and how to get all that done, and then 10 days back. So that's like 24, 25-ish days. That's about a month by itself. Then they're here. Then they were back at camp for a little bit, and then they were sent back to Jerusalem. We don't know that interim period, how long that was. In the Book of Mormon, it sounds really short. So, but we don't know how long that took. Then there's like, hey, you need to go back and get wives, and they're all like, ooh, okay, we'll go. We'll have no problems. And then they go back for 10 days, and then they talk to Ishmael, and he gathers his family. And how long did that take? We don't know. And then they came back. So that's almost 2 months that they have been at this camp of Lemuel that Lehi called it. So they've been there for quite a while. Verse 7, and it came to pass that I, Nephi, took one of the daughters of Ishmael to wife. And also my brethren took of the daughters of Ishmael to wife. And also Zoram took the eldest daughter of Ishmael to wife. So now everybody's married. Most everybody, at least the ones like Lehi's sons and Zoram, all have wives. So now we're getting this, the family is expanding. Verse 8, and thus my father had fulfilled all the commandments of the Lord which had been given unto him. And also I, Nephi, had been blessed of the Lord exceedingly. So Nephi's been blessed because he's following the commandments. He's doing what God wants. And that's where he feels like God is helping him extra in his life. Verse 9, and it came to pass that the voice of the Lord spake unto my father by night. and commanded him that the morrow we should take his journey into the wilderness. So after spending a long time in this camp, it's time to move. Now we've got ourselves to the point where we don't need to go back to Jerusalem anymore. It's time to go further on this journey, basically. So verse 10, and it came to pass that as my father arose in the morning and went forth to the tent door, to his great astonishment he beheld upon the ground a round ball of curious workmanship. And it was of fine brass, and within the ball were 2 spindles, and the one pointed the way whither we should go in the wilderness. And it came to pass that we did gather together whatsoever things we should carry into the wilderness, and all the remainder of our provisions which the Lord had given unto us. And we did take seed of every kind that we might carry into the wilderness. So now we get this idea of Lehi has a dream, and in his dream, God's like, hey, Lehi, it's time to gather up the tents, and it's time to go to the next part of this journey. So we're ending phase 1, which is access to Jerusalem. They're leaving, not going back anymore. And so Lehi gets up in the morning to start the day and to talk to his family about this move. And as he walks out, on the ground is a ball. And he's like, what the heck is this? This is amazing. This is called in the Book of Mormon called the Liahona. And this is a special tool that God has given Lehi to guide his family. Some interesting points Hugh Nibley had about this was the Liahona was, 1, a gift of God, the manner of its delivery causing great astonishment. It just shows up, basically. And 2, it is neither mechanical nor self-operating, but worked solely by the power of God. So it didn't function like a watch or a clock. It didn't have the components and things, at least that we know of, to do it. It functioned because God told it what to do, and it did it. So more the power of God was powering this thing. It functioned only in response to the faith, diligence, and heed of those that followed it. So it took an input from the people. If the people had faith in God, then this worked. If they lost their faith in God, this stopped working. So there's an input from the faith of the people. And 4, and yet there was something ordinary and familiar about it. The thing itself was the small means through which God worked. It was not a mysterious or untouchable object, but strictly a temporal thing. It was so ordinary that the constant tendency of Lehi's people was to take it for granted. In fact, they spent most of their time ignoring it. Hence, according to Alma, their needless, years-long wandering in the desert. The working parts of the device were 2 spindles or pointers. On these a special writing would appear from time to time, clarifying and amplifying the message of the pointers. The specific purpose of the traversing indicators was to point the way they should go. The 2 pointers were mounted in a brass sphere whose marvelous workmanship excite great wonder and admiration. Special instructions sometimes appeared on this ball. The device was referred to descriptively as a ball, functionally as a director, and in both senses as a compass or Liahona. On occasion, it saved Lehi's people from perishing by land and sea. If they would look, they might live. It was preserved for a purpose long after it had ceased to function, having been prepared specifically to guide Lehi's party to the promised land. It was a type and shadow of man's relationship to God during his earthly journey. So that's this idea of this Liahona. This is kind of a compass type thing where it would point like, okay, here's the direction we go. So if I hold this and walk, it'll like keep me in the line of where I need to go, basically, and get that taken care of. And so that's one of the fascinating things about this Liahona. But again, it worked off the faith of the people and by the power of God. And so it took those 2 inputs in and it functioned off of those. So it's really a fascinating idea. Now, sometimes people look at this and go, well, this is just too weird, too like wild to think about. You know, Hugh Nibley made a comment in his book, The Prophetic Book of Mormon. He said, a recent study by an Arabic scholar has called attention to the long-forgotten custom of the ancient Arabs and Hebrews of consulting 2 headless arrows whenever they were about to undertake a journey. The usual thing was to consult the things at a special shrine, though it was common also to take such divination arrows along on the trip in a special container. The message of the arrows, which were mere sticks without heads or feathers, was conveyed by their pointing and especially by the inscriptions that were on them, giving detailed directions as to the journey. Mr. Fahad deserves our thanks for having called attention to this interesting and forgotten gadget in 1958, but how would Joseph Smith have known about it? So what he's talking about is, in the ancient Arab world, there was this idea of divination. So if you remember the idea of divining rods, you take these two metal rods, so that they're bent. They're really long rods that have a bend in them, and you hold those bent parts. So the main long rods are sticking out, and you hold them equal distance apart. And as you walk, they start to shift and change naturally. And as they changed, you would turn your direction and go that way. And as they would go, they'd eventually start to come together. And when they crossed, you stopped, and there was water there. So this is I think it was called water witching. This is actually done even up into the 1800s, where you would use these two metal pieces to find where water is. It's almost as if there's like an ethereal energy that emanates from water, and these metal pieces, these rods, tap into that and can be guided by that energy and influence, like a magnetic field that they're being tapped into. And they find water that way. The water witching was, like I says, common even up into the 1800s. So what he's talking about is they would take arrow shafts, so there's no feathers on them, there's no arrowhead on them, just long straight sticks, and they would oftentimes use these, sometimes in a special case. They would have them so that they could move around and adjust, and they would divine which way do I go. So when you think of the Liahona having the two spindles that move in there, it's not that unheard of conceptually to think about the divining opportunities that they had. The difference is the divining opportunities just ran on random ways. Just like a magic 8-ball, you just shake it up and whatever comes up, comes up. But the Liahona was working specifically from the power of God to influence it, to direct it. It had truth given to it to tell the truth of what they need to do and where they need to go. And then it took the input of the faith of the people to determine how effective is it going to function. So this is not unheard of, to think of the Liahona as a concept, as an idea that did exist in the time of Lehi. Okay, so now verse 11, we talked about they're gathering up all their stuff. They're getting ready to go. Verse 12, it came to pass that we did take our tents and depart into the wilderness across the river Laman. So now they're moving. Hugh Nibley had a quote here too about this. He said, the number of days spent camping at any one place varies with circumstances. From 10 to 12 days is the average time a Bedouin encampment of ordinary size will remain on the same ground. According to Jennings Bramley, who, however, observes, I have known them to stay in a spot for as long as 5 or 6 months. The usual thing is to camp as long as possible in one place until it is soiled by the beasts and the multiplication of fleas becomes intolerable and the surroundings afford no more pasturage. Then the tents are pulled down and the men decamp. On the Syrian and Arabic plains, according to Burkhardt, the Bedouins encamp in summer near wells where they remain often for a whole month. Lehi's time schedule thus seems to be a fairly normal one, and the 8 years he took to cross Arabia argue neither very fast nor very slow progress. The Bani Halal took 27 years to go a not much greater distance. After reaching the seashore, Lehi's people simply camped there for the space of many days until a revelation again put them in motion. So they're moving. Again, we're in the ancient Arabic world. This is definitely about 1,000 years before Islam came around. But they are nomadic. And so you stay for an area. When the resources run out, you move on to the next area, basically. And so that's what they're doing. They're moving on. But they're not moving because necessarily resources run out. But God's telling them, okay, it's time for you guys to go. Time to move to the next phase of this. So verse 13. And it came to pass that we traveled for the space of 4 days, nearly a south-southeast direction. And we did pitch our tents again, and we did call the name of the place Shazer. So now Nephi gives us a directional reference, south-southeast. So the moving down, which if you're familiar with the Red Sea, that's how they would go to go down that western side of the Saudi Arabian peninsula. That's also the side where the mountains are. So there's the sea, and then there's a shore area, and there's eventually the big mountains. And on the other side of the mountains is where you get into the major deserts. And so those mountains, of course, they're taller, so they get more interactions with clouds, which means more rain, which means more vegetation, which also means more animals and fresh water and opportunities. And so it's a more fruitful place to travel. And they're probably down that area is where they're going. And now they call this place Shazer. Now this is an interesting point here. Of course, who better than Hugh Nibley? He's done some tremendous research into ancient studies and other things. He's an LDS scholar, has a lot of good points about this. He said the first important stop after Lehi's party had left their base camp was a place they called Shazer. The name is intriguing. The combination Shazer is quite common in Palestinian place names. It is a collective meaning trees, and many Arabs, especially in Egypt, pronounce it Shazer. It appears in Thogret as Sajur, the place of trees, which is the ancient Shagor, written Segor in the 6th century. It may be confused with Shagor, Sepaj, which is held to be identical with Shihor, the Black River of Joshua 19:36. This last takes in western Palestine the form Sozura, suggesting the name of a famous waterhole in South Arabia called Shizr by Thomas and Shizar by Philby. It is a tiny copse and one of the loneliest spots in all the world. So we have Shihor, Shagor, Shajor, Shagir, Segor, even Zoar, Shajar, Sozura, Shizr, and Shizar. All connected somehow or other, and denoting either seepage, a weak but reliable water supply, or a clump of trees. Whichever one prefers, Lehi's people could hardly have picked a better name for their first suitable stopping place than Shazer. So what Hugh Nibley's getting at here is this idea that this isn't just a random name they pulled out of a hat, basically, for this place. They called it this because it meant something. And this name actually fits with ancient Arabic name conventions. Seepage, like a small trickle of water, maybe a little spring. A place of trees. Where would trees grow but near a spring, honestly? So, because they have to have that supply of water. So it's clear that Lehi knows how to use the language of his time. He's familiar with these terms and ideas. And this is Arabic terminology, not 19th century American terminology. Joseph wouldn't have known this naming convention. So it's interesting that this actually matches up with what would have meant a proper name for this type of a place back in Book of Mormon times, basically. Verse 14. And it came to pass that we did take our bows and our arrows and go forth into the wilderness to slay food for our families. And after we had slain food for our families, we did return again to our families in the wilderness, to the place of Shazer, and we did go forth again in the wilderness, following the same direction, keeping in the most fertile parts of the wilderness, which were in the borders near the Red Sea. So that's what we talked about, that you're along the Red Sea, there's like the ocean, the Red Sea, then there's land, like there's the shore, and then there's some land, and then there's the mountain range. It's on that western side of the Saudi Arabian Peninsula. And because the mountains, they're going to get more rain, they're going to get more water, which means more plants, which means more animals, which means a better place to go. If you look at Saudi Arabian Peninsula, most of the cities through the peninsula are more on that side rather than in the middle of the desert areas. Hugh Nibley also in this his book, Approach to the Book of Mormon, said the wadis, writes Norman Lewis, actually simplify long distance travel. In the dry season, they become natural roads of great length and in places are often several hundred yards wide. So a wadi is a wash. Okay, this is where, like when you have the torrential rains up in the mountains, they eventually gather together and create a large river that pushes a lot of stuff out of the way and runs down to the ocean. So this wadi becomes this long, in the summertime, they could just walk along them because it was a cut path. And if they were deep enough, you could literally walk through these and not be seen by people that were up on the surface level areas. You could sneak around through the desert and not get other people seeing you. Because I mean, there isn't much in the desert, so people walking is going to stand out. So if you walk through the wadi, you don't get seen. You don't. In the military, they talk about not silhouetting yourself, and so you never walk to the top of a hill. You walk just down from the crest of the hill so that you don't silhouette yourself against the hill. So if the enemy's looking at the hill, they won't see you walk past, because if you walk along the top of the hill, you'll silhouette yourself and you can be seen. But if you walk just down behind the hill, the crest of the hill enough, you can't be seen, but you can still walk past. And so these wadis were a good opportunity. Now, when they were in the rainy season, you didn't want to camp in these because the flash floods would wipe you out. But during the summer, these were like roads that could make it easier to travel. He says here, their beds are firm and flat, and in them is to be found whatever moisture or vegetation exists in an arid country. For these reasons, they are a boon to caravans, which often follow their courses for hundreds of miles. Not long ago, Professor Frankfurt wrote of the South Desert. The secret of moving through its desolation has at all times been kept by the Bedouin. The intrepid explorers of our own day have learned the secret, however, and Lehi knew of it too. Like a sudden flash of illumination comes the statement that Lehi, by divine instruction, led us in the more fertile parts of the wilderness. So they're going through this wilderness, which is deserty areas, but they have these mountain ranges, these opportunities for food and water. And instead of walking through the sand, you walk through an area where the sand's been pushed to the side or washed out, so you get more flat, harder surface, easier to walk on, faster travel. Plus, if you're going to have moisture, it's all going to be at the bottom of the wadi, where you can dig down and find spots of water. And of course, where the plant's going to grow, where the water is. So it just makes so much sense to use these wadis as opportunities. Okay, verse 15. And it came to pass that we did travel for the space of many days, slaying food by the way with our bows and our arrows and our stones and our slings. So bows and arrows and stones and slings, so they can hit at a distance. They can take out food. He doesn't tell us what food it is. Probably small animals like coyotes type ideas. Probably some bigger animals as well were out there. Maybe some deer or some other things were along those lines. Verse 16, and we did follow the directions of the ball, which led us in the more fertile parts of the wilderness. So even the Liahona is guiding them on a path that is helping them to use these natural resources as they're going along, basically. So this is really cool. In fact, if we look at this idea from an Egyptian standpoint, most of the earliest standards were arrows, basically the most significant being the crossed arrow of Neth and Min. This suggests, which is Egyptian names, this suggested the Liahona and its striking coincidence that Jonathan Sunray, upon first opening the Book of Mormon, identified the word Liahona with a Jewish gematria designating the leader of a swarm of bees in the desert. So this is interesting that this guy, Jonathan Shunary, that Hunively is talking about here, he says that basically this guy starts reading the Book of Mormon and goes, oh, look, this Liahona matches up with these ideas that even talk about bees. Bees in Egypt and Deseret was an important principle. Follow the bees, where the bees are, you're going to have prosperity. And so there's a similar idea of these, as bees would migrate or move around, bees are going where the pollen is, which means there's plants. And if there's plants, there's animals. And if the bees are pollinating, there's more plants, which means fruit, which means vegetables and other things start to come out, and there's more abundance. So the bees help us with the abundance. So if you followed our Old Testament videos about the bees, this is helping you go from death to life. Is in Egypt, the bees were seen as helping you to go from a place of death to a place of life. And so following the bees is a guide to help you to have life. And that's what the Liahona is doing. Is if you want to live, follow the Liahona. Follow the tools that God has given to guide us. So it's a great metaphor for the Holy Spirit, really, in life. Okay, so verse 17, and after we had traveled for the space of many days, we did pitch our tents for the space of a time, that we might again rest ourselves and obtain food for our families. So they would move for a while, and then they'd stop and camp, and they'd rest up, and then they would go hunt and get the food and do all the things, and then they got better. Okay, now we're rested, would move again. So they'd stay for a little bit, and then move again, and stay for a little bit, and then move again. Verse 18, and it came to pass that as I, Nephi, went forth to slay food, behold, I did break my bow, which was made of fine steel. And after I did break my bow, behold, my brethren were angry with me because of the loss of my bow, for we did obtain no food. Now, this sounds interesting for two reasons. One is, why is it that if Nephi loses his bow, suddenly it's hard to find food? Because didn't his brothers have bows? Didn't we hear about that earlier in this chapter? They had bows and slings. But Nephi's bow was made out of steel. Now this is the other interesting point of this verse, and a lot of people have used this to say that doesn't make sense. They wouldn't have had steel around 600 BC because we're talking Bronze Age. So let's talk about a couple points on this, okay? One, usually when they're talking about bows, they're talking about what's known as the recurve bow. Okay, if you ever, a lot of times when you think of ancient bows, a lot of times you're thinking of a long bow. Okay, because the length of your bow, the height of the bow, so the bow is this piece of wood that has been bent to act like a spring. As you draw the string back, it bends it further, thus loading pressure onto that, which pushes that arrow forward, allows that forward thrust. So in the evolution of bows, long bows became these really tall, like almost 6-foot tall bows, because they realized the longer the bow, the further you can pull the string back, the more power, the more kinetic energy in that string. And then when you release it, turns into the potential, or goes from potential energy to kinetic energy, and then shoots that arrow. So if you want to shoot further distances, you need a bigger bow to get more power behind it. Well, this idea was changed a little bit because they would have what's called a recurve bow. So if you've ever seen a recurve bow, instead of the bow coming up and just turning back, it would actually come out and then turn back. Or no, sorry, it would come up and then start to bend and then come back the other way. And they learned that what happens is if you have that bend back the other way, so it comes out of so you have the handle in the middle, and as the arm of it comes up, the regular bow would just come up and turn, and then you'd have your string. The recurve comes out this way and then turns and comes back. When you string those, you're pulling that extra curve back and bending the rest of the bow. So you get a double effect, like a pulley on that string, so you're able to amplify the amount of energy that you're going to put onto that arrow, because all that extra pressure pulling back, so the bow doesn't have to be as tall to be more effective. So it's a more efficient way to shoot. So recurves were a common type idea they had. Another way is while you had your bow to stretch this way, you get another stick that was sticking out and you tie them together. So as you're pulling your bow, you're pulling this stick with it, which adds more pressure. So it's kind of a different way to do it. And most of this was made out of wood because wood was flexible and easy to gather. Steel, however, is a combination of iron and carbon at a very high temperature. Now here's the challenge: is a lot of people look at this and go, but this is more Iron Age type era, and so you can't have steel. There is no steel age for one thing, but you can't have steel. Now here's the challenge with this coming up. Just because it's known as like the Iron Age or the Bronze Age, It doesn't mean that people didn't have it before, and it doesn't mean people didn't have the older technology during it. Okay, when we went from, so the Iron Age is a historical term to talk about how iron was used. Everybody, we start to see it. A lot of utensils, a lot of pots, a lot of not pots, but like bowls or other things, pans and stuff. The civilizations start to use a lot of iron. They realize, oh, if we can go to the mountains, we break up all these rocks, we melt them, we extract the iron ore out of the rock, throw the rock part away, and then we can make things. Iron is really strong, but becomes brittle. And so when we get into the Bronze Age, they realize if we take iron and mix it with like copper and other stuff, we get a more malleable metal. It's still strong, but doesn't break, doesn't get brittle as much. And so we see this evolution. We call these ages because we see a transition. But that transition isn't like suddenly somebody figures out how to make bronze, and then instantly everybody's making bronze and nobody's making iron anymore. There's a blending of a long period of time. And iron can still be used. I mean, we still use iron today. That's what cast iron is. If you think of Dutch ovens or cast iron pans and pots, that's still iron. Just because it got used a couple thousand years ago doesn't mean we don't use it still today. So the ages, if you try to use that to say, but this is not an age of steel, so they couldn't have done that. That is a false assumption. You're making an assumption that just because it's considered the Iron Age or the Bronze Age means that steel couldn't be done. And that's a false assumption. They've actually found that King Tut had a steel dagger, and King Tut existed 700 years before Lehi's time, but he had a steel dagger. So it was there, but it wasn't in great abundance. And so that's why it's not seen as a steel age, basically. But there were things that were there. So you have to be careful when you think about those ideas. Now, one thing that was the advantage of a steel bow is, because over time, when you pull those wooden bows back, that the wood starts to get used to being pulled back, and you lose that springiness in it. And then when you lose the springiness, you have less power, which means your arrows don't fly as far and don't penetrate as well. So it makes it harder to hunt. A steel bow, they're going to take longer to wear out, which is good. But also, if they wear out, you don't have to throw it away and get a new bow. You can replace parts. There's more interchangeableness you can get with a steel bow. So that was handy. Now the problem is they're in the middle of the desert. They're not back at Jerusalem where they could buy parts. So when the steel bow breaks, you're toast. Like there's just no way around it, basically. Here's an interesting thought about this. The overall question of the use of metals by Book of Mormon cultures is an important topic that deserves detailed attention. There are 5 explicit references to metal weapons and armor in the Book of Mormon. 2 are references to Near East weapons, like the blade, Laban's sword, was of the most precious steel. So that's steel as well. And Nephi's bow is made of fine steel. The existence of steel, that is carburized iron, weapons in the Near East in the early 6th century BC has been clearly demonstrated. Robert Madden writes, to sum up, by the beginning of the 7th century BC, at the latest, the blacksmiths of the eastern Mediterranean had mastered 2 of the processes that make iron a useful material for tools and weapons, carburizing and quenching. So this comes from William J. Hamblin and A. Brent Merrill's report, Swords in the Book of Mormon, in Warfare, the Book of Mormon, a book by Stephen Ricks and William Hamblin. So they had it. They could do it. It just wasn't in large quantities for the whole civilization. But if you had the money, you could get it. So that's what's going on here. So steel is common. Some people look at this and go, oh, they didn't have steel back then. Yes, they did. There is evidence of it. It wasn't as widespread as like bronze or iron, but steel was something that was there, just not ubiquitous for everybody. So Nephi's bow is broken. Now there's a problem here, okay? Verse 19. And it came to pass that we did return without food to our families, and being much fatigued. Because of their journeying, they did suffer much for the want of food. Now they're in the desert. If you can't find food, you go hungry. If you ever watch that show Alone, when the survivors that are on there, if they don't get food that day, they don't eat. That's why sometimes they go 5, 6 days without food, because they're looking for it. Maybe they're fishing and the fishing's not going well, or they have a big storm that comes through for a couple days, or the migration patterns of some of the animals changes and they can't get those animals anymore. If you don't get food, you don't eat. They didn't have a grocery store that was full of food. They didn't have a fridge full of food. You had to go get it raw, kill an animal, skin it, clean it, cook it, take care of it to get the food. And if it wasn't there, it wasn't there. So you're going to starve and you're going to have some problems. Verse 20, and it came to pass that Laman and Lemuel and the sons of Ishmael did begin to murmur exceedingly because of their sufferings and afflictions in the wilderness. And also my father began to murmur against the Lord his God. Yea, and they were all exceedingly sorrowful, even that they did murmur against the Lord. So now they're mad. Now they're upset. Life is hard. We're starving. We're struggling, which means lower energy levels. There's, your mitochondria is not working quite as well. It takes longer to do things. It's rough. It's hard. Your body is wasting away as it consumes itself, takes the fat off your body and the muscle to convert it to energy to keep you alive. Your body has basically a 30-day supply of energy stored on itself. That's muscle and fat. When it goes through those, then you get into the organ tissue, which means your body starts breaking down, and then you start getting into irreparable damage and death. So they know that's the problem. That's where they're going. And now everybody is murmuring and they're complaining, God, why have you done this? Why is this a hard problem? Why are we stuck? Where are your blessings? Why aren't we getting blessed by you? Verse 21, now it came to pass that I, Nephi, having been afflicted with my brethren because of the loss of my bow, and their bows having lost their springs. So their bows gave out before Nephi's bow. He had the steel bow. They had the wooden bows. Their bows stopped being able to be used, and so they relied on Nephi to get his. So this is a bit more of the information as to why this was such a problem. It began to be exceedingly difficult, yea, insomuch that we could obtain no food. So this is interesting because earlier they talked about slings. So you put a rock in. Now, this isn't like a slingshot like we would have today, the rubber bands. This is a sling where they make a little leather pocket and 2 long leather strands, and you'd put a rock in the pocket, and you'd flip it around, and then you'd let go of one side. So one side you'd like tie to your hand, the other side would be just held on. You'd let go, and then flip that rock out there. Apparently, these rocks aren't working very well. Now, if you think about it, on these rocks, you're not killing a deer with these rocks. Deer's not going to let you get close enough with a knife unless you're really, really careful and quiet and patient. It is possible, but it's a lot of work to be patient for that kind of time frame. So to use these slings, they're killing small animals like birds, other things like that. So we've got to you got to kill a lot to feed the family. Whereas a deer or two would be great, but it's a struggle to get enough food for the family, basically. So this is part of the challenge that they're facing, and now they're mad. Now they're upset. So they're struggling to get this to happen. So verse 22. And it came to pass that I, Nephi, did speak much unto my brethren, because they had hardened their hearts again, even unto complaining against the Lord their God. So now they're complaining, God, why are you not blessing us? Why are you making life so hard for us? Why is this such a challenge? Why can't you help us find food? We're praying and asking you to help us find food. Why can't we find this food? What's going on? So now, in a way, it's interesting that they have transferred their problem to now it's God's problem. And God's not helping me with this. God's at fault. Do you see that deflection that's starting to happen? And we do this all the time. Maybe we make a bad choice, but then we have all these bad consequences from it. and then we blame God for not helping bail us out of it. And so sometimes this happens, and sometimes things do happen. Hurricane hits, flash flood hits, something goes wrong, somebody else makes a bad choice, and then it affects your family. And now you're like, God, why did you allow this to happen to me? So we have to be really careful about this in our lives. It's so knee jerk and so easy for us to say, I'm going to blame God. If God has all power, he will help me to get out of this situation and make my life better for me. We have to realize, though, when we say this, all we're saying is, I want God to fix me. I don't want to fix me. I want God to solve it so I don't have to change. Do you see that? That's kind of like an underlying philosophy. That whole idea of Jesus take the wheel concept that's common in Christianity. Why do we want that? Because we don't want to have if we're driving along and things are getting rough, we want Jesus to take over because we don't want to deal with the rough stuff. I don't want to have to change myself. If I'm driving and it gets rough, I'm going to have to change. I'm going to have to think about, what do I need? What resource do I need? Who do I have to be to survive this hard situation? I will have to change. But if Jesus takes the wheel, we get through the hard time and I don't have to change. This is such a false philosophy, okay? The gospel of Jesus Christ is all about change. How do we change ourself through the principles of the gospel? So keep that in mind as we look at this story here. So everybody's complaining. It's God's not blessing us. God's not helping us. It's God's fault. He's wrong. I'm right type idea. So verse 23. And it came to pass that I, Nephi, did make out of wood a bow, and out of a straight stick an arrow. They knew how to do this. His other brothers had wooden bows. They probably made them themselves. They made bow. So Nephi just made a bow. Wherefore I did arm myself with a bow and arrow, with a sling and with stones. So here's what's fascinating. Nephi's like, we need more tools. I'm going to go make a tool. There's some trees, there's some wood. Let's make it might not be perfect, but it could be something that works. So this is so fascinating. Nephi is saying, I need to change. What am I going to do? Oh, I need to think different. I need to get out of the stuck state. I need to think different about what's going on. I need to look for opportunities for resources. And so he starts to think about it, and he starts to come with ideas. Why don't I just make a bow? Yeah. So I'm going to go make a bow. I'm going to go make an arrow. I'm going to put that effort in, and now we'll have stuff. So he does that. And then this next section is really powerful too. And I said unto my father, whither shall I go to obtain food? So he gets out of his stuck state and he decides, I need to do something. I need to be willing to move. I need to be willing to change and adjust. I'm going to make a bow because it makes total sense. I know how to make a bow. Wooden bows are not uncommon. I know how to make them. I've made them before. I just had a really nice steel bow that was really awesome, but it finally broke and had problems. And now it's no longer functional because I can't fix it easily. So I'm going to make a wooden bow. So he looks for opportunities. He changes. He takes it upon himself to change his thinking. That's what we need to do when hard times happen. Be willing to change our thinking, not wait for God to get us out of the situation. That is a key part of exercising our faith in God. God will give us help when we give him something to work with. That is our movement of working and doing things. And then he goes to his father. His father is the family patriarch. So he's kind of the prophet of the family, the one who gets revelation. He goes to his father and says, where do you want me to go to find food? Now this does two things that are really interesting. One is Nephi is following tradition. He's following proper line of authority, if you will, to talk to, because it's clearly Nephi's had visions. He could pray to God and go, God, where's the food? Guide me to help me find it. He totally could have done that. But instead of usurping the authority, instead of usurping what was going on in the family and the establishments and the cultures, he went to his father which is what you would do. That's the traditional way of doing things, and that's the proper way of doing it. He went to the priesthood leader, the family patriarch, and said, where should I go to find food? So that was still following the established patterns. And the second thing it did was, rather than Nephi just solving the problem and moving on with it, he now involved his father in solving it. So his father had to now change himself to go along with what his son was saying. That's an important point, and that's what he says here in verse 24. And it came to pass that he did inquire of the Lord, for they had humbled themselves because of my words, for I did say many things unto them in the energy of my soul. So there's a lot more to this conversation that we don't have written down here, that Nephi told everybody. We just have the gist of it. He made the bow, and he asked where to go. But they had to admit, I need to change. If God's going to help us, then I need to change my attitude and my perspectives and ideas. And when they did, revelation flowed. God could help them and do things with them. So this is a great pattern for us to look like when we get into challenges and trials in our life. We oftentimes get in challenges and trials going, oh, this is bad. Okay, we'll try to figure it out, make it work. Oh, it's not working. Hey, God, why are you hurting me? Why are you not helping me? This is your fault, blah, blah, blah. Tell me what I need to do. And then I sit here and wait for God to tell me what to do. That's terrible. That's not the way to do it. You ask God, help me to know what to do, guide me and help me to be different. Help me to change so that I can accomplish what I need to do. As we do that, then we start to think about, what can I do? How do I make this work? Oh, here's some thoughts and ideas. God can then guide us and to help us. We have to be putting work into it. We have to be changing ourselves in order for God to help us. This is an important principle, and I'm so glad we have this in the Book of Mormon to help us out. Hugh Nibley said, according to the ancient Arab writers, the only bow wood obtainable in all Arabia was the nab wood that grew only amid the inaccessible and overhanging crags of Mount Jassam and Mount Azd, which are situated in the very region where, if we follow the Book of Mormon, the broken bow incident occurred. How many factors must be correctly conceived and correlated to make the apparently simple story of Nephi's bow ring true? The high mountain near the Red Sea at a considerable journey down the east coast, the game on the peaks, hunting with bow and sling, the findings of bow wood viewed as something of a miracle by the party. What are the chances of reproducing such a situation by mere guesswork? So this is a fascinating comment that Hugh Nibley brought up. This is why I put it in here, is what Hugh Nibley's saying is, what are the odds that a boy from upstate New York with a first grade education would write a story that actually matches with ancient history? That's what he's talking about there. What are the odds that Joseph Smith would make this up and that historically it matches? The idea of traveling in the wilderness, the south-southeast direction, following these mountains and having the bows, and then finding a position where there's wood that would be adequate to make a bow. At the same time, the bows break and they need the help. It's just amazing that if you take a step back and think about what are the odds that Joseph Smith would concoct a story that could actually be validated as extremely possible in ancient history, is phenomenal. It's just amazing that he would have done that. So to give more information about this, in the mountains near the Red Sea, so we're just above the 19th parallel if you're looking at a map, is a knobstick wood that is really good for making a bow. We can assume that is where they were at this part of the journey. There is a lot of game up in the mountains in this area as well. So they're in the geographic area to make it possible for this to happen, which is cool. We can kind of see that. And like we talked about, Nephi is showing he's using proper authority. He's not usurping authority, going around behind everybody to solve the problem for everybody. He's engaging them in solving the problem. He needs their help. He needs their blessings. And we need to make sure that it works. And so he's following these proper chains and ideas. So cool how the story's working out. Okay, so verse 25, and it came to pass that the voice of the Lord came unto my father, and he was truly chastened because of his murmuring against the Lord, insomuch that he was brought down to the depths of sorrow. So now we get this idea of the Lord's probably chastising Lehi, going, dude, if you would have humbled yourself, I could have given you more advice and directions. You would have had to. The only reason you guys went so long without food is you didn't humble yourself and ask me to help you. You got stuck in that stinking thinking, that negative ideas, and you didn't get out of it. You didn't change and look for me to help you. You got stuck in your thinking. Be better next time. So Lehi's got a little bit of a reprimand. Verse 26, and it came to pass that the voice of the Lord said unto him, look upon the ball, and behold the things which are written. And it came to pass that when my father beheld the things which were written upon the ball, he did fear and tremble exceedingly, and also my brethren, and the sons of Ishmael, and our wives. So they look at this ball, and they're like, holy crap, it's different. Like, there's different wording on it. How did that change? They're just amazed that it's now different. It's giving them what they need. Verse 28, and it came to pass that I, Nephi, beheld the pointers which were in the ball, that they did work according to the faith and diligence and heed which we did give unto them. So the more faith they put in God, the more the Liahona helped them. The less faith they put in God, when they started murmuring and complaining and getting in that stinking thinking, the less it worked. Now, this is how the Holy Ghost works in our life, to help us in finding truth. The more we pray and we humble ourselves and seek the will of God in a humble, objective way, the more he can help us to find truth. The less we do that, the harder it is to find truth. So just realize there's a great metaphor in here for that, basically, that we get in this story. So what they found, verse 29, and there was also written upon them a new writing, which was plain to be read, which did give us understanding concerning the ways of the Lord. And it was written and changed from time to time according to the faith and diligence which we gave unto it. And thus we see that by small means the Lord can bring about great things. I love that Nephi points out this doctrinal principle. Small means God can bring about great things through them. And the Liahona is a great example of this. So they look at this, there's new writings on it that guides them and helps them in what they're doing, basically. Verse 30, and it came to pass that I, Nephi, did go forth up into the top of the mountain, according to the directions which were given upon the ball. So that's that writing. Why we go up in the mountain? That's where the animals are. That's where there's more moisture. That's where there's going to be more plants, thus more animals that are eating the plants. And in verse 31, and it came to pass that I did slay wild beasts, insomuch that I did obtain food for our families. And it came to pass that I did return to our tents, bearing the beasts which I had slain. And now when they beheld that I had obtained food, how great was their joy. And it came to pass that they did humble themselves before the Lord, and did give thanks unto him. And it came to pass that we did again take our journey, traveling nearly the same course as in the beginning. After we had traveled for the space of many days, we did pitch our tents again, that we might tarry for the space of a time. So they're moving through this. They stop for a little while. They have this challenge and problem. Nephi goes and solves it by using proper authority and guidance, which brings more people involved in what's going on, allows them to be humbled. So that's still following proper authority is applying gospel principles. And he's still doing those things. And so it changes the attitudes of the people. They humble themselves. God can now help them more because they're more. It's not that God's not willing to help them. It's that they're not willing to listen to him. That's the problem. That's where that stinking thinking causes issues. We're not willing to listen to the promptings that we're given. They finally get it resolved. They move on their journey. Now they're at the next place where they can stop and take a bit of a break on this. Verse 34, and it came to pass that Ishmael died and was buried in the place which was called Nahom. So Ishmael he's up there with Lehi in age probably, and so Ishmael passes away. Now, this is the next naming convention place that we get here in the Book of Mormon. Nahom. It's a place which was called Nahom, not a place they called Nahom. So it could have been a place that already had a name before they got there. In the early 1990s, a German archaeology team discovered a carved altar a few dozen miles east of modern Sanya, inscribed with a reference to the tribe of NHM, or Nahom, and another with a like inscription has since been located in the same area. Found in the very area where Nephi's record locates Nahom, these altars are the most impressive concrete evidence to date of the Book of Mormon's historicity. That was Terrell Givens out of his book, People of Paradox. So they have found a place called Nahom, basically. And I realize it's NHM because vowels, they use consonants instead of vowels. Vowels changed the word meaning, and which is why Hebrew is such a hard language to learn, because one word can mean different things depending on how you orient the vowels in there. Hugh Nibley had a thought on this too. He said, note that this is not a place which we called Nahom, but the place which was so called, a desert burial ground. Jowson reports that though Bedouins sometimes bury the dead where they die, many carry the remains great distances to bury them. The Arabic roots Nahom has the basic meaning of to sigh or moan, and occurs nearly always in the third form, to sigh or moan with another. The Hebrew Naham, comfort, is related, but that is not the form given in the Book of Mormon. At this place, we are told the daughters of Ishmael did mourn exceedingly, and are reminded that among the desert Arabs, mourning rites are a monopoly of the women. So there is a place, Nahom, and this is probably the most concrete evidence we have of where Lehi Nephi's family is at this time. So we know where Jerusalem is, we know where the Red Sea is. Now we can figure out where this Nahom is. We can start to see this pattern of here's where they probably traveled. And you can see it on a map. It's really fascinating. It's following where it would be. So the legitimacy of this journey that Lehi took his family on, we have enough landmark things that they've put in here to be able to show where that is on a map and to understand that. It's so fascinating how this has come together. Now, verse 35, and it came to pass that the daughters of Ishmael did mourn exceedingly because of the loss of their father and because of their afflictions in the wilderness. And they did murmur against my father because he had brought them out of the land of Jerusalem, saying, our father is dead. Yea, and we have wandered much in the wilderness, and we have suffered much affliction, hunger, thirst, and fatigue. And after all these sufferings, we must perish in the wilderness with hunger. So they're sad, their father's dead, but now the daughters of Ishmael are mourning. This is fascinating because mourning was a thing that the women did back then. They were exclusive. You could hire women to do the mourning for your people. That was a job, a mourner. You got paid to mourn. We see this in the story in the New Testament when I believe it was Jairus' daughter that had died, and Jesus brought Peter and John with him. You remember to the house, and there's all these mourners down there, and he's like, "Why are you guys mourning?" And they're like, "Well, because the girl's dead." And he's like, "She's not dead. She's just sleeping." They're all like, "Ha ha ha! Of course she's dead, you idiot!" And so that's when Jesus kicks them all out and raises her from the dead, and she's alive again. They're professional mourners. This was a thing. This was a legit deal. You got paid to mourn and cry for people. And women were the most common people that would do this. They would come together to mourn. This was like their job. So that makes sense they would, but now they're taking this to the level of now blaming Lehi. So they're in that stinking thinking, and now Lehi's taking the brunt of this. Verse 36, and they did murmur against my father and also against me, and they were desirous to return again to Jerusalem. So now they're mad at Nephi, because Nephi is the most ardent connection with Lehi. They kind of seem as a pair of following God and these revelations and visions and ideas. And so they're all going, now we want to go back to Jerusalem. Now this is common. Okay, we all want to go back to Jerusalem when hard times happen. What this means is, I'm not talking about literally going back to Jerusalem. What I'm talking about is we oftentimes want to go back to a place of security when hard times happen. Sometimes we can't go back though. Sometimes going back means losing the progress. And that's not a good thing. And that's the challenge that they are facing right now, basically. So what is our security? Where are we falling back to security and not willing to keep going and using our faith to move forward? Verse 37, and Laman said unto Lemuel and also unto the sons of Ishmael, behold, let us slay our father and also our brother Nephi, who has taken upon him to be our ruler and our teacher, and who are his elder brethren. So now they're going, let's exert power over them. Now, worldly power is defined by the ability to make a choice that someone else lives with the consequence of it. That's what they're doing. Our choice is we're going to go back to Jerusalem and you're stopping us, and so we're going to kill you. Therefore, you can't stop us. So I'm choosing to take your life, and you're going to have to suffer the consequence of this, meaning you're dead. So that's what they're doing. They're trying to exert worldly power to gain dominance, to do what they want to do, not what God wants them to do. Verse 38, now he says that the Lord has talked with him, and also that angels have ministered unto him. So this is them building the argument why Nephi and Lehi are crazy, basically. But behold, we know that he lies unto us, and he tells us these things, and he worketh many things by his cunning arts, that he may deceive our eyes, thinking perhaps that he may lead us away into some strange wilderness. And after he has led us away, he has thought to make himself a king and a ruler over us, that he may do with us according to his will and pleasure. And after this manner did my brother Laman stir up their hearts to anger. So if you look at this is so fascinating. Okay? They're like, it's Nephi is the root of our problems. Again, it's not me, it's them. I'm not the one that's wrong. I'm not the one that needs to change. They are forcing me to do something I don't want to do. So I'm going to, he sees them as, oh, do you see this idea? They're thinking in worldly mentalities. They're thinking in these worldly power structures. And now they're using this worldly thinking to justify their emotions against Nephi and Lehi. If one thing I've learned in sales, everybody buys on emotion, but justifies with logic. By the time somebody starts to say, well, this is why this would be a good idea to buy this, they've already bought it. Emotionally, they're in. Now they're just trying to find a reason to justify it. That's the thing, okay? So they've already bought into the idea of, we want to go back to Jerusalem, go back to the safety, security, prosperity we used to have. To heck with this crazy traveling in the desert and suffering stuff. Even though it's going to end up being better for them in the long run, they don't want to do it. They want to go back to safety instead of pushing forward with faith. And so now they're justifying and trying to build a logical argument inside their mind that says why Nephi is wrong and they're right. This is such human behavior, it's astounding. It's funny that they call it, and also the angels have ministered unto him. We know he lies to us. He has these cunning ways. Oh, he's so deceptive and evil, and he's got this voodoo magic that he does, and he confuses us and manipulates us. And Nephi's like, what are you talking about? I don't do any of that. In fact, it's not Nephi that brought the angel to talk to them outside the city walls of Jerusalem when they went to get the brass plates. That was God sending an angel. They saw an angel. They've seen this Liahona, this ball that changes its writing on it. They've seen these miracles, but they're trying to find a way to claim it's not God. Because if it is God, then I'm wrong. If it's not God, if I'm being manipulated by somebody with worldly powers, some kind of unknown magic or something, then I can be right. And that's the wrestle they're having in their mind. This is that idea of worldly thinking versus spiritual thinking. Okay? Spiritual things don't make sense when you come from a worldly standpoint. And vice versa. Worldly stuff doesn't make sense when you come from a spiritual standpoint. This is part of that choice we have to make in life. Are we going to follow God or not? The choice is up to us to choose. God hopes we follow him. That's why he gave us agency, so that he hopes we'll follow him. But he knows there's an alternative. And that's the price of giving us agency, is there's an alternative. But that's important for us to have that agency to do that. Verse 39, and it came to pass that the Lord was with us, yea, even the voice of the Lord came and did speak many words unto them, and did chasten them exceedingly. And after they were chastened by the voice of the Lord, they did turn away their anger, and did repent of their sins, insomuch that the Lord did bless us again with food, that we did not perish. Now, this is fascinating. This is really interesting, okay? Every time they're humble and repent, they get blessed. Pretty simple pattern we see through this, okay? What's wild about this verse is now it's not an angel appearing. They're all hearing a voice, probably inside themselves. We see this a little bit in 3rd Nephi chapter 11, just before Christ comes. They suddenly probably have this voice in their head that is telling them this, and they're like, oh my gosh, this voice in my head just said this. And they're like, yeah, I heard the same thing. Oh my gosh. And so they all heard it, okay? This was an external voice, not their internal voice, but an external voice inside of them, telling them, you guys are wrong. I am God. You need to follow what I'm doing. Lehi and Nephi are right. You need to follow what they're saying. And they're like, oh my gosh, who was that? Who just said that? There's this voice we all can hear, even though it's not like, we're not hearing it outside of us. We're hearing it inside of us, but it's not our voice. That's another manifestation of the reality of God. And it changed them. It did turn away their anger, and they repented. Because, I mean, what do you do? Oh my gosh, like all of a sudden this voice from God is coming to me inside my mind and telling me that I'm wrong and I need to change. Oh, okay, I guess I need to change. And so that's fascinating that they get this. Now, here's what's interesting is really God doesn't oftentimes get involved that much into the challenges of our life. Now, these guys are on a special journey. Remember, Lehi and Nephi believed that they were part of that prophecy of the branches of the olive tree being broken off and being grafted into other areas of the vineyard. So they're not just on this journey for themselves. They're on this journey because it's part of the mission of God, of sharing his gospel, of telling people about this, of helping out. If you think about it, if Laman and Lemuel had killed like Sam and Nephi and Lehi and got rid of them and went back to Jerusalem, we wouldn't have a Book of Mormon at all. Mormon, Moroni, Alma, all of them, none of them would have existed because Laman and Lemuel and everybody else would have gone back to Jerusalem, and they would have probably been wiped out by the Babylonians shortly after they got back. And that would have been it. They've been done. Nothing. But because it was so important for them to move forward and so important for them to have this record and to do what they do so that we could have the Book of Mormon today, to bless the lives of so many people from it. So this was not just an ordinary journey they were on for themselves. This is a journey they were on to fulfill the purposes of God. So God steps in to help in certain instances in this, because there's more to this than just a typical journey that they're doing. So let's jump over to the next chapter as we continue the saga of this family.